Hey guys, I would like to continue this little journey of going down the rabbit hole with IDubbbz. Now, if you're not aware, I made a video the other day that was relatively popular, at least for me, hitting about 1,000 views. And that's about as successful as this channel has ever been. And well, let's face it, that's not the greatest achievement in the world, but it is something. And so I figure I might as well give a little bit more details on the whole situation. So, how exactly did this all start? Like, where did this drama all originate from? Well, first we got to go back to what IDubbbz originally did. When he first started out, he would criticize other people who were making content online. This included making fun of certain genres of content. Genres that can be a little bit cringe or very low effort. Now, of course, this what I'm doing right now is pretty low effort, but I've done my research, so I'll at least try to inform you, alright? So, iDubbbz started when he started making videos that were kind of off the wall, a little bit edgy humor. And he also did, like, basically what would be considered documentaries, where he would make fun of, like, certain genres, like reaction videos, where people would just look at other people's content or watch, like, a TV show and post, like, some of the video or obscure the video, and then they would film their reactions to it. And they still do this nowadays. I've been personally enjoying a bunch of reaction videos to the Invincible series, which it's not something I kind of want. It's well, let's not get into that. Invincible is another can of worms that I'll open at some other time, but it's a relatively good show. People react to it. Well, before reaction videos really became popular, one of the main critics of the genre was IDubbbz. And again, um, there are ways to do it incorrectly and make it so it's not very entertaining. And then he would make fun of like individuals who were, you know, jerks. Okay, not very good people. Let's just say. Now, again, haven't really watched much of his early content. A bunch of this is second and third hand, but I know basically what kind of content he thrived off of. After a while, he eventually got a girlfriend and then eventually married her. And her name is, well, I don't really care that much, honestly. I've heard the name, uh, actually, it's Anissa. I don't know her username though. And I've heard the name and it's gone in one ear and out the other. Because from what I understand is, well, she's not a very good person and nor is she very popular. At least not for the reasons that I would say is a good reason to be well known. But we'll get into that in just a minute. Another such person online who would make really off the wall content was Sam Hyde. Now, Sam Hyde was a somewhat controversial figure, and he has been described as far right. Now, if you know anything about me or my channel, I can tell you for absolute certain that whenever the media uses a term like far right, they're talking about somebody they simply don't like, who they think certain types of people follow. And, well, let's just say that the term far right has been way overused. Personally, I don't think that Sam Hyde is right wing at all, or at least not far right. Sam Hyde is kind of a wild card. He just makes humor for humor's sake, and he doesn't always explain his jokes, which is one of the most important aspects of comedy, is to not explain things too much, to allow the audience to find their own humor in things. Because as soon as you start explaining the joke, it starts becoming less funny. Sam Hyde is and his crew are well known for making completely off the wall material and not really caring whether or not somebody understands the joke or not. So if it offends somebody, they don't care whatsoever. It is not their priority. So, if they make some edgy humor, a bunch of left-wing journalists might come out and start criticizing them. Well, Sam Hyde eventually did make a deal with Adult Swim to make a show. And this show was actually relatively popular. Now, it's not something I ever watched or I've ever even heard of until recently. But by the ratings, this show should have been renewed for a second and probably a third or fourth season. Well, there was a hit piece that was put out on Sam Hyde by some nobody whose name completely has left my mind. Again, completely an irrelevant individual who basically said that the far right now has their entertainment and it's on Adult Swim. And this guy would only get a few upvotes here or there. He wasn't very popular or very well known, but this hit piece kinda, well, it made people and the CEO of Adult Swim nervous. Now, if you don't know much about Cartoon Network or its sister channel, Adult Swim, or anything about like Boomerang or Warner Brothers, they were one of the best cartoon networks of all time. Cartoon Network, after all, everyone's heard of it. In fact, one of my favorite numbers, actually my favorite number is 47, because 47 used to be the channel that Cartoon Network was on, where 46 was what Nickelodeon was on. And I would watch it all the time, like Powerpuff Girls, or Johnny Bravo, or Teen Titans, or Dexter's Lab, or Courage the Cowardly Dog. A whole bunch of absolutely brilliant shows. Well, like any other Hollywood network, these uh, networks, say that kind of weird, like Cartoon Network and Boomerang and Adult Swim started to have certain issues with political activists coming into the scene and questioning whether or not these shows were appropriate for children. A Boomerang basically died eventually. It was old throwback cartoons from Hanna-Barbera way back in the day, like the Flintstones and the Jetsons, and a bunch of other shows like Roadrunner with Wile E. Coyote and all that such. And eventually, Boomerang started to get less and less attention, and then it eventually died. The cartoons that started coming to Cartoon Network ended up being more and more safe, let's just say, including like shows like Steven Universe. Whereas in a show like Teen Titans, it was relatively understood that some of the villains could just not be reformed. They could be taken down, arrested, thrown in jail, and otherwise they would have to be punished for their crimes. They couldn't just be reformed. What they had done in the past is often unforgivable in cartoons like that. Similarly, in Courage the Cowardly Dog, it was a pseudo-horror show, and a lot of the villains never turned into heroes. In fact, I don't think of very many villains that ever turned into a hero in the show, but there were a few here or there. One episode including Courage and his family going to Broadway and saving a old musician who had gotten so bitter that he had fused with his old theater and turned into a monster, and they were able to revert him back into being a normal human. And there were other such villains that could be reformed, but in a show like Steven Universe, it basically decided that every single villain had some kind of excuse for what they were doing, and that it could be reformed, and that fighting for one's freedom or for justice was not something that was necessary. Now, you could always talk out a situation, no matter how insane or how absolutely fanatical or violent a person was, which is not very much a reflection on reality. There were other shows, and they just seemed not to get the same kind of attention that the old cartoons did, like Cow and Chicken, and again, a bunch of other cartoons I mentioned before. It was very clear that activists had started to get involved in the shows and many of these were in the show writers and even at the top management. Eventually, Cartoon Network, while it's still around more or less, the as the fall off of cable has occurred because more people had watched YouTube videos and gone to streaming services, the actual long-term studio of Cartoon Network was shut down and moved back to like Warner Brothers' actual um, headquarters, which was the end of an era for a lot of us. For those who grew up in the 90s, that was a huge blow to us. Anyways, this also crossed over with Adult Swim. While Adult Swim is more edgy and was meant for adults to be watching at night, a lot of the shows were more aimed at teenagers, and that like you would get anime or other shows that weren't all that offensive, but so it wouldn't like scar a child for life, but they were very strange shows like Aqua Team Hunger Force, for example. What always confused me about that show is it always the beginning animation for it, the opening, always seemed to indicate that it was based on a show that was made prior to it. Like Carl, the next door neighbor, had at one point been the mayor or something, or the police chief, and that like the Aqua Team Hunger Force was some kind of like kids show way back in the day, kind of like Harvey Birdman. But it wasn't that. It just gave that indication, and the opening was like a sarcastic view on what these characters would do in their day-to-day life. They weren't superheroes, and they weren't jumping out of exploding helicopters. But other shows like Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, was based on the actual Harvey Birdman show, which Harvey was a actual superhero. And the show was a tongue-in-cheek, excuse me, was a tongue-in-cheek endeavor where Harvey Birdman, instead of staying as a superhero, um, became a lawyer, and he was defending very suspect people, including this famous characters like George Jetson, like that you would see on Boomerang, or Scooby-Doo and Shaggy from the actual Scooby-Doo Mystery Inc. show. Another huge success from Hanna-Barbera. And then there was another show called Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which was basically like a tongue-in-cheek interview show where they would bring on famous celebrities and ask them certain questions, but the humor was very off the wall. And that was based on the actual Space Ghost cartoon from back in the day. And that show was about Space Ghost being like a superhero in space, and in the actual Space Ghost Coast to Coast, he had allied with two of his main villains and formed this interview show. And then there was C-Lab 2021, which was based on C-Lab 2020. C-Lab 2020, I almost said 2022, that's why I hesitated there. Again, C-Lab 2020 was a very interesting show where these people lived in a dome under the sea and they had to deal with different scenarios going on in the ocean as they tried to perform their research, whereas C-Lab 2021 takes place after a time skip of a year where the captain lived under the ocean by himself as the rest of the crew left for a year. And when they came back, the captain was more or less insane, and this led to a bunch of wacky hijinks, and it was more of a comedy than an action show. This is why Sam Hyde's show fits so well with the rest of the theme, based on completely off-the-wall and wild card tactics. Now, Sam Hyde is a very personal individual. He is somebody who never really talks about his personal life, but he does talk about his personal opinions sometimes. However, he has never really been a political figure. So when their hit piece came out on Twitter from this random nobody against Sam Hyde, the um, the Adult Swim executive panicked and called him, and basically Sam Hyde was telling him, "Let's calm down. It's not that big of a deal. Just relax. We'll be able to fix this. Just give us like another season. This will be gone in like 2 days, as long as you don't make a big deal out of it." And basically they said that no, they wouldn't risk it and fired him. This really shows on the total degradation, God, that is a difficult word for me to say, on the actual like whole series of networks that were all on channel 47. Now, I didn't mention Toonami. That's actually what a lot of the anime and such was on. Whereas the adult shows, Aqua Team Hunger Force, Sea Lab 2021, and all those other shows were. So, excuse me, I made that mistake. One of the best shows, by the way, is Megas XLR, but I'll talk about that, the drama around that show at some other point, because that was one of my favorite shows of all time. And what happened to the creator of that show is complete and utter BS. And well, adults, Toonami / Cartoon Network really screwed him over and has ruined the childhood of a lot of us who loved that show. Anyways, after Sam Hyde was de facto canceled by a absolute nobody who no one remembers anymore, he was basically blacklisted from all of Hollywood, which again, a lot of people do get blacklisted from Hollywood, but a lot of the people who are blacklisted are often conservatives or people who really don't have any controversies except for the fact that they don't support the newest and greatest thing coming out of Washington, D.C. Sam Hyde, while being a controversial figure, hasn't really done anything to really warrant being canceled like that. So obviously he was pretty upset. He ended up getting banned from YouTube because when one network cancels somebody, everyone else likes to dogpile them because obviously this guy is going to ruin our reputation, despite the fact that he had done really nothing wrong whatsoever. This is where Idubbbz comes into the situation, or at least it would be, because he had contacted Sam Hyde and basically wanted to make a documentary on him. But Sam Hyde is a relatively smart individual and he's very socially aware. He's a very social guy and easy to get along with. However, he is also, again, like I said, a wild card. He read the email from Idubbbz and realized that there was some kind of trap here, that there was something that Idubbbz was after, and he suspected, probably, it seems, that he was going to be in basically the next guy to be put on Content Cop. However, it wasn't going to be an episode of Content Cop, but it seemed like it might be a hit piece. So Sam Hyde does what Sam Hyde do, and he decided to absolutely flip the script on this whole situation. He had decided to basically, with his friends, completely and utterly gaslight Ian, playing a whole bunch of practical jokes and pranks and bringing him to an office building and setting up in there, renting out like some, I heard it was a dentist office, and that they would rent it out for like the week or two that they would be filming this documentary, and that basically he was trying to keep Idubbbz on the back foot the entire time, which actually worked. And it turned out that Sam Hyde's suspicions were correct about Idubbbz. Now, he wouldn't point any of this out until much later, but what Idubbbz, one of the things that he was trying to do is that he was trying to confront Sam Hyde on a piece that had happened 8 years prior. Now, 8 years prior to this documentary being made by Ian, he had made some content criticizing Sam Hyde, and Sam Hyde had personally, as far as Ian IDubbbz was aware, had copy struck it down. And that had led to some tensions between IDubbbz and Sam Hyde. So during this situation, you could tell very quickly as the actual interview started that Sam Hyde started to get very awkward, and it was very clear that the chemistry between the two had completely died out. It was a long interview, and Sam Hyde was trying to get a read on this guy to try to figure out if this was some kind of hit piece being done on him. Because from Sam Hyde's perspective, he had fallen off quite drastically because of the canceling, and he had been forced onto many third-party platforms or smaller platforms in order to get his content out. He tried to get out clips on his YouTube channel, his secondary YouTube channel from what I understand, or through third-party or second-party individuals to people who had a direct relation with Sam Hyde. Ian had basically ambushed Sam on all of this. And in the video, it's actually quite interesting because Sam Hyde is sitting on a stool that is higher than the chair that Ian is sitting in. And he's leaning forward kind of like I am. And you can see him lean really into the conversation, whereas Ian is laid back in a chair and much sunken beneath it. It really shows just how much Sam Hyde had basically dominated the entire 2 weeks. Well, that had led to some issues, and before that they had done some other stuff. Like, for example, before this whole situation between Ian and Sam had occurred, Ian had challenged other creators to a boxing match and had always been refused. Sam Hyde had been challenging Hassan Piker to a boxing match, and Hassan, being the guy he is, just completely ignored every single challenge that was going on. Well, when they met, one of the first days that they fought, when they interacted with each other, is they fought in a boxing match underneath a freeway overpass where drug paraphernalia had been littering the ground. Okay? This was a obvious place where, people would go and do drugs. And Sam Hyde absolutely dominated that boxing match. Sam Hyde, despite how he looks, is actually, he's not Rasputin. I know Rasputin was a pretty strong guy, but I don't think he was much of a fighter as he was, just kind of a lunatic. But Sam Hyde actually knows how to fight. And the day after the actual interview, where all the tension was at its highest, everyone went out to the shooting range to practice with a whole bunch of firearms that Sam Hyde and his crew owned, which just added to the tension because now there was a bunch of people who were very awkward around each other with loaded firearms. Sam Hyde basically trusted the guy, and it turned out alright, but things never really turned out very good between them. After 7 months, Ian still hadn't put out any content on Sam Hyde on his IDubbbz channel. Now, Ian, again, was not answering any of the texts from Sam Hyde, and Sam Hyde admits that he started to message Ian, text him, and ask him about any updates on the documentary that was coming out. And Sam Hyde said that, hey, I think eventually I just started texting him too much and that he started to get awkward. So after 7 months, Sam Hyde and his crew decided to release their own footage, dubbed the IDubbbz gaslighting material, basically, where they pretended Sam Hyde had like a cracked out girlfriend, for example, or that, again, that their studio was actually in some renovated doctor's office with a whole bunch of like professional setup instead of having, all of their interesting books and um, like figures and paraphernalia behind them. Not drug paraphernalia. They're, action figures. A lot of content creators always have this background of like shelves full of their own personal stuff. It's just a thing that happens nowadays. And and they released it all, and they basically, it wasn't a hit piece that they released on iDubbbz, but Sam Hyde did voice some of his concerns with Ian's motivations for all of this. And then it was about 2 weeks later, after some editing, that Ian actually did release his own version of the documentary, adding in a whole new perspective and entertaining millions of people. Together, both videos equated to about 2.5 hours. And everything seemed to be fine, but the tension was still lying underneath. And eventually there was a situation. IDubbbz Ian had decided to start his own boxing tournament for famous YouTubers. So this was called Creator Clash, and it was supposed to be a actual charity event where they would raise all this money for pay-per-view and people who would go and actually watch the show in person. And Sam Hyde, wanting to be involved in the boxing, who again is a pretty good boxer and a lot bigger than you think he is, so he could be in like a higher tier of fighting, had basically asked if he could participate in the fight. And basically Ian had said, no, you cannot. And Sam Hyde was very gracious about this. He knew that he had been canceled and that maybe advertisers would not be very friendly to this whole scenario. So he did the next best thing. He decided that he wanted to actually train one of the boxers. And I don't remember the name of the boxer off the top of my head, but this guy was going up against Aaron Hansen. Now, Aaron Hansen has his own controversies that at one point I should talk about. To make a long story short, John Tron and Aaron Hansen, the guy who made the awesome animation series, had come together to form a Let's Play channel, and they played a bunch of video games together. Eventually, John Tron had a burnout, and there were creative differences that were never reconciled and never fully explained to the public. And there seemed to be a break in their friendship. Not a complete break, but a break nonetheless. So John Tron stepped down, and Danny, I don't remember his last name, a guy who was a musician in a YouTube band, decided to come onto the show and do that instead. Eventually they even brought on their editor, Barry, and they brought on Ross, who was one of, I would say, Danny's friends for computer game Let's Plays. Now, I was a huge fan of these guys back in the day, and I sent a letter to Aaron and one of my PS2 games. Now, it wasn't my PS2 game, it belonged to my brother, but we had gotten the PS3, and this was right when the new PS3 had been designed to not be backwards compatible with the PS2, because Sony had gotten basically greedy and didn't want people to play PS2 games on their console. They wanted people to rebuy them for the PS3. Sony does this every few years. So my PS2 games that were left in my house after my brothers moved out were basically worthless, and Danny had never watched The Lord of the Rings. So I sent him my favorite PS2 game that we had, which was Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, and they never played the game. And I made a relatively professional letter to Aaron, basically being like, hey, this is the game. I want you guys play this for Danny's sake so that he can kind of to know Lord of the Rings a little bit. Then I made a somewhat less professional letter to Barry. That was probably a little bit too personal. I was young at the time. I was naive. I didn't really think about it too much. But I was like, hey, Barry, I'm trying to start my own YouTube channel for Let's Plays, and I never ended up doing it. I have streamed myself playing games before, but it's a little bit too much work to do the kind of editing required for that stuff. And I was basically asking Barry, like, what kind of programs he uses, how much time he takes, like, what tools does he use, and all that stuff. And I never got an answer from them. I don't know if it was lost in the mail or if uh, they just saw it as like some weird fan and never answered. But hey, it is what it is. I don't hold grudges about it. But there were some weird things going on with Aaron and the whole IDubbbz channel that basically turned me off from actually watching them after that. And again, I have no issues with them. If I met them in person, I might ask about it, but it's not something that, is that important to me. Which, ironically, is what Idubbbz said to Sam Hyde about him basically ambushing him about that copyright strike that had happened back in the day. So maybe I'm a little bit lying. Maybe I am a little bit bitter, but it was so long ago, it's not really that big of a thing anymore. Anyways, Aaron was the fighter, and his opponent was being trained by Sam Hyde. Sam Hyde had bought 5 tickets to the ring and had bought actually pretty expensive tickets in the front row. Kind of like where all the VIPs are. And about a few hours before that the show was actually to start, Sam Hyde was banned from the show. And it was very hectic for any of Sam's crew to actually get in, and the security was given a picture of Sam Hyde and basically told that do not let this guy in. If you see him anywhere, make sure to throw him out. And anyone who was wearing shirts or sweaters or jackets with Sam Hyde's logo on it, they were being harassed by staff. It was completely insane. Sam Hyde at this point was very much frustrated. And to make matters even worse, the guy he trained absolutely demolished Aaron Hansen, who, by the way, is a pretty big guy who does work out, and he's pretty. I don't remember if he's pretty tall or he's relatively short. I don't remember, honestly. I think he is tall than normal, so that he would be like in a like medium heavyweight or heavyweight category for boxing, but he was not a fighter. He had never really fought, and he hadn't really trained for a boxing match, so he was absolutely destroyed. Anyways, after this, Sam Hyde basically went full scorched earth and basically blamed Idubbbz's girlfriend. Now, to come back to her for a while, she was a relatively unknown person on the internet and only really became famous because of her association with Idubbbz. As time went on, though, Idubbbz tried to become more and more friendly to advertisers, getting rid of his controversial content and going back on a lot of the views that he had before. Ian was never much of a right-wing person, but before trans ideology and the whole LGBT movement really kicked off, Ian was very critical of third wave feminism, and he was critical of people who always tried to play the victim card. his new girlfriend, not gaining much popularity, eventually decided to do OnlyFans and had gotten into some relatively inappropriate behavior, being around other men. This led to a lot of jokes on 4chan, for example, that Ian had basically become a cuck. Now, whether or not you would say that is true, I mean, I personally would not be happy if my girlfriend or wife was trying to do content with other men or sell pictures of herself online for other men to admire. In the same way, I would not like it. I'm sure my girlfriend or wife would not like it if I was showing like random people pictures of my genitalia, for example. It's just not something that married couple should do, in my opinion. I mean, after all, I'm Catholic, so it's kind of understandable. And it became Sam Hyde's opinion that in order for Ian to feel like more of a man, he had to humiliate somebody that 4chan had made a meme out of. Now, Sam Hyde, while being controversial, has never really done anything that's criminal. However, it has become a meme online for Sam Hyde to be used as a scapegoat for any horrible actions that happen in the world. Like anyone who does a mass event, you know what I'm talking about, or some kind of Yorkshire Terrier event, let's just say it like that. Sam Hyde is plastered all over the internet and saying that this is the guy who did it. We have pictures of him, and this has become a huge meme all over the internet. In Sam Hyde's opinion, this girl, Anessa, the girlfriend, was a bad influence on Ian and had tried to get him to become more family friendly and to try to cuddle up with the left-hand side of the aisle. Now, he didn't say left-hand side of the aisle specifically. Again, Sam Hyde, not very much of a political figure, and he has no problems, it seems, with either the right or the left. In fact, a lot of his content is actually making fun of the right, but he never actually, like I said, he never actually explains his jokes, so it's hard to tell how serious he is about anything. Anyways, this led to a situation where Sam Hyde was basically saying that Anessa was going to ruin Ian's life and that he was falling off the path. He had basically sanitized himself to try to fit in with a crowd of people who, let's just face it, he really shouldn't have gotten involved with. This included Hassan Piker, who started trying to gaslight his fans into thinking that Ian had always been left-wing, despite his anti-victim narratives that he had been pushing about feminists and about people of, like, different races or different genders. And this had started to cause a huge rift, because as weird as Sam Hyde is, he does have a very big fan base, and despite the copyright strike back in the day, Sam Hyde didn't even remember the situation, and he had no grudge against Ian, and he was trying to help Ian as much as possible, and he would even have helped with promotions. He would have helped get more people onto the fight. I mean, the event itself raised like $1.5 million for charity. So it's not like it was a flop or anything, but Sam Hyde believes that he could have actually had gotten it to go to new and greater heights. And not only that, I think Ian himself fought and lost fractionally, like barely, to his opponent, and Sam Hyde believed that if he had been in the crowd, he would have been able to cheer him on and distract his opponent enough for Ian to win. Now, I mean, that's kind of cheating, but hey, it is what it is. Sam Hyde, after all, I mean, he's a relatively good guy, is what I'm basically saying. So after this, Sam Hyde was basically very critical of Vanessa and pointing out that, you know, what she is doing is inappropriate and that she has negatively affected Idubbbbz's sense of humor, and Idubbbz had even said some very disgusting things, saying specifically after the interview that he was usually the puppet master, not the person he's interviewing, which meant like Ian was again basically admitting that he was a psychopath trying to manipulate the people around him, and basically Sam Hyde was trying to guide him on the right path, but well, with no real success. It seemed that Sam Hyde had completely broken the mind of Ian by being just so off the wall and such a wild card that Ian could not predict him, and had basically been forced into a place of subservience, and had, in essence, well, been put into a submissive role in the situation, which did not help the attacks that were going against Ian about him being a cuck. So that would explain why that Sam Hyde was banned, and it's, in Sam Hyde's opinion, it was actually Anessa who actually had Sam banned entirely. Again, Sam had been basically cancelled for no real good reason. He was just kind of a weirdo online who made somewhat inappropriate jokes, but he had never done anything illegal, and he never really had done anything particularly right-wing or anything like that. It's just that he did not conform to the leftist standards and had been cancelled for it. And since a lot of the channels, like Adult Swim and platforms such as Twitter at the time and YouTube were being controlled by more left-leaning individuals, they had jumped on this bandwagon to help cancel Sam Hyde, which basically skyrocketed in Sam from legend into myth as more people learned about him but had no idea where he actually came from or what he was actually about, and all they ever saw about him was memes about, him being a Yorkshire Terrier. In a way, while Sam had fallen off in the number of views, he had been skyrocketed into being someone more influential than Ian had been. And again, he had inspired so many people that Ian seemed to have a small dick syndrome from the whole situation. The next year, as Ian wanted to make his own Super Bowl, as he called it, and make a bunch of money, decided that he was going to start paying for everyone's flights out for all the most high-profile people, and start hiring even a professional boxer and renting out a absolutely gigantic location that had way more seating than would ever be necessary for the amount of people that would be going. And this was only the second year. And, well, all the situation with Sam Hyde had caused some drama, and with all of this reckless spending going on, instead of making $1.5 million like he had the year previously, he actually lost $250,000 in the whole affair, making the whole thing absolutely pointless, with not a single dime actually going to charity. They had tried to raise the money by live streaming after that, and specifically doing a charity event live stream, and it didn't make enough money to make up for the difference. Obviously, it's very difficult for that to happen. At this point, Ian went completely and utterly insane. He started to actually support guys like Hassan Piker, who again are basically terrorist supporters in essence. And he further, after he had backstabbed Sam Hyde, who wasn't really a friend of his, but at least somebody that he got along with, or had seemingly got along with, at least enough to work with him for those 2 weeks, he stabbed one of his best friends, Ethan Klein, in the back, and caused Ethan's wife to have a absolute mental breakdown when he released his content cop on Ethan Klein. At this point, Ian, IDubbbz's reputation was completely in the gutter. He had stabbed not only Sam Hyde, who, while not as popular as he used to be, was an internet legend, and he had backstabbed one of his friends he had lived with or stayed with for several weeks, met his family, basically was a close personal family friend of Ethan Klein, with a lot of this being blamed on Anessa, but it was very clear from Ian's previous statements and his previous content that while he was trying to put on this image of a clean, like nice shaven, proper haircut having guy, he was in reality basically a psychopath, being willing to throw anyone and everyone under the bus. His content cop videos were him going after people that were untalented or were even more disgusting than he was, or just outright boring, and revealing them for the people that they were. This has led to a content cop video being made against IDubbbz, basically outlining a lot of this. And a lot of this with Sam Hyde is stuff that I watched relatively recently. Actually, I watched a lot of it not even an hour ago. So, Ian being completely and having his his reputation destroyed, all by his own fault, having stabbed multiple people in the back and sided with actual terrorist supporters, has now lost some of his biggest headliners for the third creator clash, and he has been forced to step down. No one wants to go to this event. No one wants to see it. It is in another giant location that will never be able to fill up all the seats. It is going to be a huge, giant flop. You can trust me on that. It is going to be awful for him. And honestly, Ian has done this all to himself. You can blame his girlfriend as much as you want, but this guy is willing to try to change the image that made him popular. It has been said that it almost seems like he got to where he was from controversial content, and he will pull the ladder up and criticize and try to destroy anyone who tries to become popular with controversial content. Again, neither IDubbbz or Sam Hyde are people that I particularly care about or particularly, their content is not something that I'm very much interested in. I tried watching some of Sam's Hyde stuff, and I think he done something recently where he brought in people to live in a house and he filmed them 24/7 and tried to like gaslight them to do some really wacky stuff inside the house. And honestly, it just stank of like those old reality shows that were trying to get people to engage in unnecessary conflict in order to increase the drama. Like Jersey Shore, for example, wherein like they would have a conversation and then the director would say cut and then say have that conversation again, but one of you rip off your shirt and get real angry. Like really weird directed stuff. Now I don't know if that's actually what those videos were about, but I was watching like out of context like clips and videos on this like new series that Sam Hyde was making, and I was just like, I don't get what's going on here. I don't get what the point is. I'm sure that there's people out there that will be like able to tell me what it was, and I would get the joke. But again, Sam Hyde doesn't explain his jokes, and he shouldn't. But it's just not my kind of material, and he definitely didn't deserve to be canceled, and he definitely didn't deserve to be backstabbed by Ian like that. Anyways, I would defend Sam Hyde in this regards. Anyways, he's been controversial, but he's never been, like some rabid, like anti-Semite like Hassan Piker is, for example. And again, the whole Israel situation is unrelated, but basically I've always had like a relatively neutral stance, and the more I learn, I'm just like mildly on the side, Like, not mildly, but I'm just like, yeah, I understand what both sides are doing, but Israel is on the better half of this. But at the same time, America doesn't need to be funding Israel because Israel has plenty of their own resources. We can just sell them the material. We don't have to give it away for free. They can afford this stuff and they can take care of themselves, basically, is my personal opinion on that. But it's not really something that's too in depth with it, but that's basically what it is. So Ian has completely and utterly destroyed his life, and he has, in essence, been slowly bleeding out supporters for quite a while now. He had been going up relatively at a steady rate even since the Sam Hyde situation, but he had lost at least 20,000 subscribers from that whole scenario, and he has lost 20,000 subscribers in the last 2 weeks. And as far as I can see, is he's going to continue to lose subscribers, and it's nothing he can do about it at this point. He has completely and utterly destroyed his career. He won't be as popular. He still may get 1 million views, but he will just slowly taper off until eventually he is relatively forgotten, and all he will be remembered is for being a traitor to his friends and to his family. And apparently, even Anessa's family sends messages to Sam Hyde basically deriding her as an absolutely terrible person. Now, again, to get into this, Anessa's father has Alzheimer's, and she has tried to basically grift off of it, pretending to care about Alzheimer's victims, whereas the family has said that she's estranged from her family. She doesn't really care about the father. She doesn't really care about his condition. She basically just uses it as a sob story in order to get attention. Meaning that she is also basically a complete and utter psychopath. Now, again, you have to take Sam Hyde on his word that her family has gotten in contact with him, but I have not seen any evidence either to prove it, but at the same time, it would be relatively inappropriate for Sam to share those messages, and I don't see any evidence to contradict it. And based on the behavior of both Ian and Anessa, I would say that the story is true, that she is just an absolute terrible person to her friends and family. But anyways, that is more of the backstory on Idubbbz's complete fall from grace and how he may have put himself in an absolutely terrible position, being defended by Hassan Piker, who has actively played without commentary, without criticism, Houthi propaganda, and interviewed without pushback an actual Houthi terrorist, has now broken several laws in America, including one that specifically says that you cannot provide material support to terrorists. And by supporting and showing off their terrorist propaganda, well, obviously he is now in violation of that law. And if the DOJ really wanted to, they can push a case against Hassan. And Hassan, despite being the son of from a billionaire, but in Hassan has claimed that his father is no longer as rich as he used to be and is only worth several million or $100 million, whereas by estimates, Hassan Piker, a socialist, is worth, at minimum, $4 million and lives in a mansion and drives a Porsche. If the DOJ actually went after him, they could sentence him, if he is convicted, up to 20 years in federal prison for what he has done. And this is the guy that Ian has basically sided with. And I already explained how Ethan had tried to reach out to Ian several times, and in response, instead of just talking to his friend and condemning the people that were going after Ethan, Ian decided to make a hit piece on his best friend and, again, completely ruin his reputation. So, I mean, it seems karma has come around for Ian, IDubbbz, and he's getting everything he deserves. So, that is more of the context of the whole IDubbbz situation. I hope that helps, guys. Bye.